Hello, my name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Okay, it is a little bit before the end of the month, but I have already read 26 books, so we're gonna go ahead and call it a day in terms of wrap up. Oh, buddy, I know, I'm sorry. There's a butterfly right outside his little window perch, and he is just beyond distressed that he cannot get to this butterfly. It's been a really good reading month, all that to say. This was the month I feel like I really got back in the groove, and I've been going back to the formula that I know really works for me. I do, a meteor book, and then I do a palette cleanse, and then a meteor book, and then a palette cleanse. And that has just been working really well for me. So I did get to 26 books this month. I made some progress on various challenges, which was great because the last couple months I'd gotten behind that a little bit. Not that anybody cares about that beyond me, but what can I say? I am a Virgo moon / Enneagram 1, and that's just my truth. We're gonna talk about my hits, my disappointments, and my surprises, but first I'm gonna go through some of the stats for my reading for this month. I actually imagine that these stats will go up a little bit because I still have a day and a half in the month left to read, but we'll just call it for now. He's making himself at home in his little perch, so we're right next to him while I'm filming, so that is who you'll be hearing if there's little mews happening. So, like I mentioned, I did get to a grand total of 26 books so far. I guess that's probably going to go up to 27 or 28 based on the couple that I have going right now, but for now we are at 26. Those 26 books were a total of 7,561 pages with an average book length of 291 pages, which is basically, in terms of number of pages, double what I read in April. So that was exciting. 20 of those books came from my TBR versus 6 of them were ones that I did not own. So that was also good to be making some progress on things that I'd already bought and wanted to read. The average age of book for this month was 12 years, which was great because my goal is to always hit at least 10 on that. But alas, the average amount of time that a book had been on my TBR was 4.5 years, and my goal is 6 months to a year. So, I guess the good news is that I read some books that had been on my TBR for a very long time, but that did kind of drive some of those stats down a little bit. In terms of genre, as you can see, I did read, half of what I read was romance, which gets back to what I was saying. I think I've really gotten better about being in the groove of get something meatier done, read something light. Heavier, lighter, heavier, lighter. That is a big tip that I have for people who want to increase their reading speed or get through more books is, at least for me, mixing things up and not trying to read the same kind of book over and over again unless I'm just really in a binge mode, for me helps me keep my pacing up. So I'm not going from a classic to a really heavy nonfiction book. Usually I try to kind of mix it up, and that sort of keeps my brain moving and not getting kind of in a rut and getting stuck somewhere. So anyway, that's just, for me, that's what works. But you can see I did read a lot of romance, and then I read a little bit of all the things that I like to read. I read a little bit of nonfiction, a couple of classics or modern classics, a few mysteries, some SFF, all the other things that I like to read were the other half of what made that up. And then in terms of rating, so it's interesting because like I said, I perceive this month to be a really strong month in terms of reading, but if you look at my average rating, it's actually a little lower than it's been so far in 2020. It was, I think, a 3.28. I did definitely give out quite a few 2 and 2.5 star kind of things, and I had a DNF, and so definitely a strong weighting towards lower ratings this month. And it wasn't necessarily counterbalanced with a ton of really high ratings. I did have several 4 stars and I had 1 5-star, but a lot of sort of either middle of the roadish kind of books to slightly better than average. Technically a little lower rating, but I think part of why I perceived this to be such a good reading month was just getting back into the groove of having variety. And I don't know, I feel like it's, having lower rated books can be helpful in terms of just letting you know that you're trying things. Some of the books that I rated lower were a little outside my comfort zone, and so I'm taking risks. I'm not just, getting stuck. So anyway, those are the overall stats I had. And then in terms of challenges that I addressed this month, I got some things done this month. So first I did a you guys pick my TBR challenge, and I read 4 books for that. I read Swiss Vendetta, 3.5 stars, mystery. It was good. The Witch Elm by Tana French, which also was a book on my 20 books I want to read in 2020 list, which is a surprise. So we'll talk about this more here in a second. Aurora Rising by J. Kristoff and Amie Kaufman was a disappointment, so we'll talk about that more here in a minute. And then Akeda Warrior by Nnedi Okorafor was a hit, so we'll talk about that one more too. So that was Social Media Picks My TBR. I did have a few books for the We Need Diverse Romance kind of challenge I have ongoing. The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. This one wasn't quite as good as I was hoping, because I know some people just absolutely love this. For me, the pacing was slightly off. Like, I think it was a little long and needed some of the meat cut out from the front, but very well written and very charming. So like, if you're into a hate to love kind of thing, this I think is a good pick. Also, the author is a delight, so if you like reading from delightful people, there you go. A Spoonful of Sugar by Kate Hardy also has some representation for the heroine who has hearing difficulties. And then I guess I have a couple of other ones, but they fall into other categories as well. So moving on to Operation Sci-Fi, I did read THRAWN, and I'm doing a vlog of that, so you'll get full thoughts on all of these in a different one. I gave this 3 stars. I think this was like fun. I had a really good time in this. I don't think it's a great, like, I don't think it's super high quality in the scheme of things, but it's fun. And I think for what it is, it's pretty darn well written. And I think if you like this kind of book, you'll be into this. So I had a good time with this one. I also read Red Rising, which was a disappointment, and we'll talk about that. And A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine, which was a hit, and we'll talk about that one more in that section. Arc-wise, I read 3, I think. I read Dragon Unleashed by Grace Draven, which was a hit. We'll talk about it. I read Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert, which was a definite hit, and we will talk about it. And I read A Taste of Sage by Yaffa Santos, which was a disappointment. We'll talk about it. Oh, and actually, sorry, no, I missed one. I also read Little Secrets by Jennifer Hillier, which was kind of a surprise. I don't think I put it in my surprise category, but this, I really love the writing. The trope combo in this wasn't quite right for me. This is a missing child trying to find them kind of domestic thriller that also has like a heavy component of extramarital affair in it, which isn't necessarily my favorite, but I thought the writing was super good. Like, this book basically made me really interested to read more from Jennifer Hillier, even though this specific plot wasn't my favorite. I actually also thought that the ending of this was quite nice. So anyway, I will definitely read more. I gave this 3.5 stars. Like, I liked this, but I didn't love it. But I'm very intrigued about the author. So that was another arc that I got to. Okay, and then, so I have a lot of challenges going right now, guys. I always do, don't I? That's just how it goes. Another from my 20 I want to read in 2020 list was PNIN, or Nin, by Vladimir Nabokov. I gave this 4 stars. I really appreciated finally understanding kind of what the Nabokov humor is like. Yeah, this was a kind of a charming, interesting book. I thought it's very meta in a lot of ways. I don't know. Nabokov is an interesting flavor, I think, is kind of my takeaway from this. If you like a kind of a novel that plays a lot with language, this also has a professor as the main character in sort of like a upper crusty kind of private university in the States. He's a Russian immigrant who teaches Russian, and he's sort of hapless, and I don't know. If you like that kind of a plot, university or academic setting with a professor as the main character, and you like sort of interesting humor, I would recommend this. This was enjoyable, good first outing with Nabokov as like a full novel. I noped out of Lolita, but this was a good first encounter with him. And then The Warden by Anthony Trollope was from my 12 classics I want to read in 2020, and we will talk more about it. So I think that was all the challenges. Good gravy. I made a lot of plans for this year, guys, and in moments like these, I realize they were possibly too ambitious. But what is life without striving for goals? That's my Sagittarius rising. Okay, so let's start with disappointments, because actually I had a lot of disappointments this month that could have made this list, and we'll just talk about a few of them. I do just want to quickly mention, I read Normal People by Sally Rooney, and this is the most disappointing for me, because I put this on my 5-star prediction list last year. I thought that I was going to absolutely love this, and no. I do not absolutely love this. I DNF'd this. I DNF'd this at about 50 pages because I did not like the writing. Now, it is a very distinct flavor of writing, so I can see, and actually in theory, the kind of writing I often do enjoy. Oh, sorry guys, I just noticed that I'm like really low in frame. Oh yeah, that's much better. So this is the kind of writing I do often like, which is very simple, kind of straight to the point. Minimalistic maybe is a way to describe this. I just didn't connect with it, and I will tell you what the tipping point was. This is one of those books that does not use quotation marks of any kind to denote dialogue, and that is such a grammatical pet peeve of mine. It really is distracting to me. So I tried, but I wasn't really connecting with the characters. The writing was bothering me. And then frankly, the deciding point was like, I'm not gonna read 300 or whatever it is, like 270 pages of no quotation marks. I just can't do it. So very disappointing. I DNF'd this. I didn't even rate this on Goodreads because I didn't feel like I read enough of it to do that. But I'm really sad that I didn't enjoy this. Like I special ordered this from Book Depository, like, because I was convinced I was gonna love this, and I really liked the British cover. Lesson learned there. So that was my biggest disappointment. I would say followed by Red Rising by Pierce Brown, which I read for Operation Sci-Fi. And actually, I guess technically, oh, I didn't mention this, Red Rising was both in Operation Sci-Fi and it was a 20 books I want to read in 2020 pick. Like, I picked it for that 2020 list because I thought I was, at least going to enjoy this. Most of my friends love this series. I've heard a lot of good things about it, a lot of hype. And I guess what will be maybe a theme for a lot of this list of disappointments, the writing I could not deal with. I felt like it was so melodramatic, so overwrought. It just really put me off the book. And I was trying to kind of go with it and get in the flow, because it's a book that has a lot of interesting things that happen in it. So if you haven't read it, it's sort of like a dystopia, sci-fi dystopia in the future with a caste system based on colors. So like the bottom of the tier is the Reds, and they are basically like glorified enslaved people who are terraforming Mars, and our main character comes from that caste, and it's kind of about him becoming a part of an uprising to reshape the social order. The writing was really what kept me from liking it. I will also say though, two other things did bother me about it. One is it was written in an era that dystopia was very heavily influenced by the Hunger Games. And I think you can really see that in this book. So I do have some problems with it in terms of its originality. I don't think that's not like a deal breaker for me, because of course we're all borrowing from other creative influences. Like all authors are influenced and in turn influence. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with that, but I think if I'm already not liking a book, some of those more derivative elements can kind of further annoy me, if that makes sense. Like, I think if I'd been more into this, I would have been like, oh, it's kind of like the Hunger Games, and great, I love the Hunger Games. But because I wasn't that into it, I was like, oh, it's kind of like the Hunger Games. Like, this is not as good as the Hunger Games. So there was that, and then there is a lot of allusions to sexual violence in this book. I don't think it was the author's intention for that to be like misogynistic or lazy, but I think, again, because I was sort of not bought into the project of the book, it kind of ended up coming off that way to me. I'm okay with sexual violence as a part of books. Like, this is just a personal take. Personally, sexual violence or assault in a book, to me, can be earned if it feels like it is really contributing to the story. If it is a shortcut to make your bad guys bad, that bothers me. And I kind of felt like this more fell in that side of the spectrum. So I felt like that was, and part of it was, I don't think I really knew that about the book. So I guess I would give that as sort of just like a content warning. It's in the book a lot, and in contrast to something like Poppy War, where I think the allusions to sexual violence in that book feel really earned and like really sell me that this is a horrible consequence of war, and like, it feels like it's a meaningful part of the themes of the story. I think that's what this book was going for, but for me, it didn't feel earned. So all that to say, I gave it 2.5 stars because I did kind of like the ending. Like, I liked some of the stuff with like the way the Mustang stuff evolved. It's not a book without merit. I can 100% see how people who liked the writing style more could get into this book more. It just didn't really end up working very much for me, sadly. And then Aurora Rising, which I think if you watched my vlog for the challenge that this was a part of, you will just see there wasn't anything like terrible about this book. It's a really fun kind of book, and I personally just didn't have that much fun in it. So it was therefore kind of disappointing. I gave it 2.5 stars. My biggest critique of this is I think that there's a bunch of different point of view characters in this, and I think their voices seem very similar. Like there's not enough distinction in the writing between the different points of view characters. So I think if you're interested in this, I wouldn't like steer you away from it. It just wasn't quite for me, sadly. A Taste of Sage by Yaffa Santos. I gave this 3 stars, and I actually didn't have a bad time reading this one. This was an arc, and I found the author very charming on a Social Distance Book Fest panel I saw her on, so I like her. I would try something else from her in the future. This was a problem of genre expectations not being met, because I was expecting a more straightforward genre romance, and I would call this a book that doesn't quite know if it wants to be women's fiction or a romance, and therefore doesn't fully succeed at either. I think the writing about food in this is super nice, because the setup is 2 chefs falling in love, at least that's what it says it's about. There's also a magical realism element that's described on the back of the book that does not come in until very late. So I think just all around, I think the expectations this book set up in terms of how it was like marketed or positioned, I think didn't set it up to succeed fully. So that was sad. This isn't one I would necessarily steer people away from, but I would want them to kind of know the type of book they're getting. Oh, and then the last disappointment I was going to mention was The Road Back to You by somebody. I read this for a work book club because we're doing this big like Enneagram thing in our department, which has actually been really fun. I've enjoyed getting to know more about my coworkers, and I was on a panel for the 1, so that was fun. I'm a 1 wing 2, if you're curious, or if you know anything about the Enneagram. I was honestly kind of shocked that they picked this for a work thing, because it is so overtly religious. Like this is a religious book about the Enneagram, and I just felt like it was quite superficial. Like any just like light Googling of the Enneagram would have given me most of that same information. And it also was like religious, and when I wasn't expecting it to be. Like I don't think that's necessarily the book's fault. More just like, it surprised me. I was not expecting to get a very Jesus-y book, and that's kind of what I got. So I felt like it was quite superficial, and then with the added punch of surprise, like sneak attack religion, in the context with which it was recommended to me, made me feel like it wasn't my favorite. So there you go. I think that was all of my disappointments. Now we can move swiftly into some surprises. First, we're going to start with His Tiger Queen, because this book has maybe my favorite dedication that I have ever read. So I'm going to read this to you. This book is for Carol Baskin, a woman who taught us all that tigers are loving, caring, hungry creatures who can soothe souls and solve any annoying problems with their all-consuming appetites for life. So I think you can maybe guess where the story is going. There's like a mob princess who has a pet tiger, and that pet tiger is basically like Chekhov's loaded gun for the whole story. That dedication was everything. And it just reminded me of how much I love the fact that with self-publishing and like the kind of Kindle Unlimited verse, people can write books that are much more responsive to like current moments and get them to like market really quickly. I don't know. I just thought that was hilarious and so great. Just so great. So that was one surprise. That was delightful. I actually also really liked His Tiger Queen. I gave it 3.5 stars, which is pretty good for a Mink book. So I gave that 3.5 stars. Another author I read 2 books from this month that I enjoyed, and I gave both of them 3.5 stars, was R.S. Gray, and she wrote, the 2 that I read this month were The Allure of Dean Harper and Not So Nice Guy. So The Allure of Dean Harper is like a hate to love work romance thing, and Not So Nice Guy is a friends to lovers, also workplace romance thing. And R.S. Gray, I guess I put it as a surprise because I forgot R.S. Gray is actually like a super solid contemporary romance writer. She writes rom-coms, or they write rom-coms, and they're really fun. They're very, I think, like well executed, with the exception of every single book I have read from this author really struggles. Like there's a really great buildup, but the transition from the buildup to the relationship never works very well. So like at 75%, I'll be sitting there thinking like, oh, I think I'm gonna give this like 4 stars. And every time at the 75% mark, the transition is just really not fulfilling. And so it ends up like diminishing my overall experience of the book. So I don't think I've ever given one of their books more than a 3.5 star, but I always really enjoy them for most of the book until that point. So I don't know, it's just an interesting reading experience where you really like a lot of what an author is doing, but they consistently do one thing that keeps you from loving what they do. And then The Witch Elm by Tana French. So I guess I won't say a ton about this because I think I covered it at length in my vlog where I was reading this, but I guess I'll just say the surprise here is how much I can love the writing in a book, to the point where even though I'm not enjoying the plot or the characters, I can't stop reading it. So like, I couldn't put this down, even though I didn't like the plot or the characters and only ended up giving this 3 stars. There's just something about the way Tana French, the way she puts a sentence together and the imagery and like her kind of the closeness that she has to her point of view character, I think works really well. I can't quite discern the witchcraft that is Tana French's prose, but I couldn't put it down, even though I wasn't really enjoying it all that much. So it was just a very odd reading experience. It does make me more excited to get to The Likeness, which is a book from her I think I will enjoy much more than this, certainly, but even more than In the Woods. That was the first book I read from her, which again, I couldn't stop reading, even though I didn't ultimately love it. I think I gave that like a 3.5, maybe a 4 star. But anyway, her writing is hypnotic. I don't know what kind of crazy voodoo she's got going on, but it works for me. And then the last surprise I wanted to mention was The Warden by Anthony Trollope. So this is a book that I put on this year's 12 classics I want to read in 2020 list because I wanted to see if I was going to like this series. Like I kind of told myself like, okay, I'll read at least The Warden. Hopefully I'll also get to Barchester Towers, and then I'll kind of tell me if I'm into this or not. Well, I've not even read Barchester Towers, and I know that I want to keep going in the series. I was told that this is sort of like, it's a pretty short one, and I was told that it was pretty much a prologue to the rest of the series, and like, hey, even if you don't love this book, keep going, because it's basically, it's kind of sounded like people were saying this is the worst book in the series, but just keep going. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. Now, I think I was kind of in the tank for this in a way that maybe a lot of other readers wouldn't be, because when I was in grad school, the class that I taught as a part of my whatever was church history. And my professor that I was teaching under was very focused on the history of the Church of England. I think I know a lot about this time period. I've learned a lot about the specific conflict that is at the heart of this, which is this like big upheaval that's happening in the Church of England over the course of the 1800s as British society in general is increasingly moving away from being religious to a more secular posture, which definitely like is further cemented in the 1900s. So I think just like the underlying history of this book was already very interesting to me. Then on top of it, I should say, basically this is a character study about church politics in like the 1850s in the Church of England. That's really what this book is. And it's a character study of this warden, of Hiram's hospital and this controversy that's arising. Loved the character study bit of this. I thought the characters were really interesting and well drawn, and I really enjoyed the contrast between the warden and John Bold, who is the kind of this rebel rouser who is trying to get him ousted from this position even though he's in love with his daughter, and the Archdeacon Grantley, who is his son-in-law, who's like a really like got a big stick in his ass, and the bishop. And I just love the observations of all the relationship dynamics in this. And I, in contrast to some of the disappointments, loved the writing. Like the writing is so clear. It's got a really interesting tense happening in this. It's like I don't remember what it's technically called, but it's like kind of present and kind of like maybe a past perfect. I don't know. The tense is very interesting in this in terms of how the author is talking to the audience. I don't know. I can't quite describe it. I just finished this yesterday, so maybe I just haven't had time to fully collect my thoughts, but I love the writing and thought that it was really, in a way that sometimes Victorian literature isn't, it was very clear prose that reads very well to a 2020 reader. Like, this isn't one where you're gonna have to struggle to get through the sentences to understand what's going on, which I think can be a barrier to entry to some classics. I wouldn't recommend this as a starter classic because I don't know that everybody would love the plot in it as much as I did, but I am chomping at the bit to read some more from this author. I will definitely continue in the series. In fact, the next time I get a YouTube check, I'm gonna buy the rest of the series in this edition because I really enjoyed this. Definitely want to put that on my like long-term classics plan to read all of the books in this series, and delighted to have a new classics author who, you know, especially once I get to the next book, which I think is kind of the most famous in that series, I'm hoping that I feel like I can read as a standalone and I can kind of put it in the mix of, hey, here's a classic to try. I do think that the writing in this is just very accessible to today's readers. So anyway, this was a wonderful surprise because I was expecting to like, but not necessarily super enjoy this one, and I ended up super enjoying it. So then I've got 5 hits, and I'm gonna try, I feel like this video is going long, so I'm gonna try to keep it moving here. 5 hits. First of all, 4 stars to Single Dad by Noelle Adams, and that is because I just love this Milford College series. It's so fun. I just love Noelle Adams so much. She's such a comfort read for me. And I put this as a hit because this is one that got me to enjoy a romance, a contemporary romance that had one of the characters with a child. That often kind of puts me off in contemporary romances because I feel like the kids end up just being sort of plot devices and not well-realized characters in and of themselves. I feel like it sidestepped that. I just really enjoyed this, and I love that series, and I'm so sad there's not going to be any more, but I recommend all 5 books in that Milford College series. I just think that they're a really fun contemporary romance. Then also, Dragon Unleashed by Grace Draven is coming out in June, and it's just so good. If you like, I would call this a fantasy with heavy romantic elements more than a fantasy romance. I think it kind of weights a little bit more towards the fantasy. I just love the way that Grace Draven, her prose and the way she describes fantasy worlds feels really lush to me. Like I don't know that this fantasy world is necessarily that unique or interesting, but I think it is interesting enough. And I just love the way she describes it. It's sort of a world with different, like a nomadic tribe, a culture kind of based in this city, magic around dragons, Dragon Unleashed. That's kind of like coming back into the forefront of the politics of this world. There's like a ban on using magic. So the magic that does exist gets, I think, kind of described and manifests in interesting ways. And I think what's also nice about this book is that the first book in the series, Phoenix Unbound, I enjoyed, but it's hard to recommend to people because it's just real intense in some of its plot points and subject matter in terms of things like sexual assault and enslavement. It just was a lot. So I get why that would be hard for a lot of readers. I enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed how the 2 main characters have both been really abused in those ways, are able to like help each other heal and grow. But, you know, it's a hard book, and it also has some pacing issues, which I think we do also see in this book. I think the first half of this book is very slow, which I'm okay with because I like her writing so much, but I think is not going to work for every reader. But I personally just really enjoyed how slow the romantic element in this is very slow burn. It involves our main character is somebody we met in the previous book. She is a part of a nomadic trading group that I think are meant to sort of be similar to the Romani in our world. And she has a healing magic that she has to kind of keep hidden, but the hero is a dragon and he is hurt. And so a lot of this book is her like nursing him back to health. And I just really enjoyed my time with it. It's not the best Grace Draven out there, but I thought that it was really well done, character-driven fantasy with strong romantic element and really beautiful prose. So for me, it's a win. I think the series in general is one that's hard for me to broadly recommend just because I don't think it's one for every reader, but it is one for this reader. So that's all I guess I can really tell you. Next, I also gave 4 stars to A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine, and this was part of Operation Sci-Fi for me. So it was one of the ones I think I was most excited about coming into the challenge because I had never heard of it before, and it being in the Goodreads finalist list is what put it on my radar. Like I would not have read this book or may not have read this book if it hadn't been a part of this challenge. And I was really intrigued by the description because it sounded like it had a lot of political intrigue and there was heavy reference to the fact that there's like some strong influences from like Aztec culture into the sci-fi world that we're looking at. And it definitely has those things, and I think just executes it really well. I would probably describe this as like a political thriller in a sci-fi world, which is something that like definitely worked for me. I'm I'm finding more and more that political thrillers in other worlds are books that tend to be really fun and enjoyable for me. It also has this element where, so the kind of setup is our main character is coming to the kind of the equivalent of maybe Rome in this empire, like the main city of this space empire, as an ambassador, because the previous ambassador they don't exactly know what happened, but she's from sort of like this satellite space station that's like not a major player in the political worlds, but you know, they have an ambassador to this main city, and they get word that they need to send a new ambassador. So she doesn't really know exactly what happened to the old ambassador, but it's probably not anything good. And they have this like secret technology where on this little off, you know, out in the middle of nowhere space station, they've developed a technology where you can have another person's consciousness implanted into this device in your neck. And so you have like a shared consciousness. And I personally have never seen that before. And I thought that was really well handled, really interesting. It kind of reminds me of fantasy books where there's like, where the main character has like a familiar or like a daemon kind of thing. But I really liked the way that that played out. I thought that the kind of different political machinations were all really interesting. I enjoyed learning about the like sci-fi culture of this. Like just overall, I felt like this was a really fun book that was well written and well executed. I do think, again, it had some pacing issues. I've said that for several of these books, and that often is kind of what will tip me from between a 4 and a 4.5 is like, oh, okay, I did kind of get bored in this one little section or whatever. But I do think ultimately the ending was very interesting. And overall, I just really enjoyed this. So you'll see more whenever that vlog comes out of my thoughts as I was going, but really recommend this. A few people I know have read this recently. I think everyone has enjoyed it because it's really solid. And then speaking of books that are a part of a vlog, Arkady Warrior. You guys saw my thoughts on this one in the vlog, and this was my second favorite thing I read this month. Nadia Okorafor has such a rich imagination, and I just love the way she translates that to fantasy for young people. I just really like this series. I hope we get more, but even if we only ever have the 2, it's really good. It's a series I definitely recommend, and something that's just different. And like I said, so imaginative. Really fantastic. So you can see my full gushing in that vlog, but overall this was just really great. And then we come to the one book that I gave 5 stars to this month. I came to this book expecting to like it, and to like it a lot. I was expecting to enjoy it, but this book just hit me right where I live. You know, I don't think relatability is the only criteria for enjoying a book, but in terms of relatability in this case, this book went from a book I enjoyed to a book I loved. And that was Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. 5 stars. This is one of my favorite contemporary romances I've ever read. So in terms of my background with Talia Hibbert, I've read, I guess, maybe like 4 books prior to this one from her and have enjoyed them all. Like, they've all been good, but none of them have been more than like a 4-star, which is still really good, but just they haven't been like, oh, like, love it. It's been more like, oh, Talia Hibbert writes romances that I really enjoy. There was always something that kept me from like fully just absolutely loving it. Mating the Huntress is probably my second favorite I've read from her. And the only reason I didn't love that more is just that it was a novella and it didn't have time to like fully get to a point where I absolutely loved it. Like, I could have read another 100 pages of that book. Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I thought that there was a couple of like kind of just pacing issues in it that weren't my favorite. There's always just been something slightly off that kept one of her books from being a 4.5 or a 5-star. This is a book that to me gets everything that she does well exactly right. The banter, let me tell you, the banter in this is so spot on. It hit me right in my funny bone. I was laughing out loud throughout this book. And it's not even just the humor, it's also just that the rapport between the characters felt really lived in and great. The characters are so, we'll come back to that. The plot, I felt like was moving along at the right clip. It wasn't getting slogged down in anything. Like, I felt like it was, every scene was building on each other in a really nice way. I thought the conflicts in here were interesting. There's great representation in this, and that representation is used to advance the plot, and especially in terms of the hero, who is a Muslim British man, and kind of some of the implications of that. I just like, all of that was great. And then the characters, oh my gosh, these characters are characters that I love. Now, her, I have never related to a romance heroine more. I think we have slightly different approaches to casual hookups. Other than that, we are the same in terms of our romantic hangups. So that's where I think personally this ends up being a book I love, just because I related to her so much. And then I think the other piece of it is the kind of hero he is like could not be more my type. So I think this book just hit me where I lived. Let me describe to you this hero. He is a cinnamon bun hero who used to be a rugby player. So he's like yummy beefy daddy. Like he's a big, tall, dark, handsome kind of guy. He like loves his family. His brother and father have died. And so like he's taken on this role in his family. Like I think he, you know, is taking care of his sister-in-law and his niece and his mom. He runs a charity teaching young boys how to play rugby and also how to fight toxic masculinity. And he is so sweet. He's emotionally fluent. He loves how smart she is. Like, it could not be more, like, this is just like written for me, basically. I love these characters so much. I love their dynamic so much. I thought that the conflict between them made sense. It's a fake dating trope. It's a friends to lovers trope. Like, it's everything I like in a romance. So that's why I have to give it 5 stars. I have to say it's one of my all-time favorite contemporary romances. And even though I will tell you that Alyssa Cole's book, A Princess in Theory, that I read earlier this year, I think on a technical level is probably better than this. I liked this even more than I liked A Princess in Theory, and y'all be knowing how much I love that book. So I could not recommend this more. I'm very curious to hear what other people have to say about it, because it is just so my thing. I'm curious to how other people respond to it. It comes out on June 23rd. I picked this as our July We Need Diverse Romance pick. So if you want to join the Discord, I can't wait to talk to people about this. So like, I'm excited. I absolutely love this. Also, I just love how beautiful this yellow cover is. This book, guys, I just loved it. So definitely my favorite thing I read this month. And if you need, like, I also think, I know that we're not going to be doing a ton of traveling this year as a planet, but if you're looking for like a summer fun book that's going to make you laugh out loud, I think that this is a great pick too. Anyway, read this book. That's the bottom line. I'll stop gushing for now, but you know I'll be bringing it up again. I cannot help but stan. So that was my epic reading in May. I feel like I've been talking a very long time. I have no idea how long I've actually been talking, but it feels like it's been a long time. As you can see, I felt like this month was the month I really got my mojo fully back. I am on a good reading roll right now. I'm trying to keep that energy alive and trying to make up on some of the challenges I've gotten behind in over the next month. But yeah, I'm glad to feel like I'm kind of a little bit more back to normal, at least in that part of my life. So let me know how your May reading has gone. Was it a good month? Still a little slumpy, normal, whatever? Let me know that below. Let me know maybe what one of your favorite books you've read this month was, or any responses you have to the books that I talked about. And yeah, I think that will do it for now. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you are having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.